The television screen flickers to life. It's 1969 and families across America sit down for their nightly ritual, the evening news. But tonight is different. Haunting images flash before their eyes. Innocent Vietnamese women and children, their lives brutally ended. The anguish is palpable, the disbelief inescapable. America's perception of a far-off war is about to change forever. The Vietnam War, a complex conflict intertwined with Cold War tensions, had been raging for years. As the U.S. escalated its involvement, stories of heroism were countered with tales of despair. Leaders like Ho Chi Minh and General Westmoreland became household names, and phrases such as hearts and minds echoed through political discourse. The war's reality, however, remained distant for many, obscured by propaganda and misinformation. But what if the truths of this war were even more harrowing than the public imagined? Were their secrets so dark that they remained hidden for decades? Join us as we venture into the shadows of a conflict that still casts a long, haunting shadow over modern history. Welcome to History on Fleek. A dark, covert operation revealed. Where better to start than a clandestine program that was kept from the U.S. public until it was all said and done? From 1967 to 1972, the CIA ran the Phoenix program, a series of operations tailored to dismantle the very core of the Viet Cong infrastructure. The methodology of the Phoenix program in name was infiltration, counterterrorism, and interrogation. However, looking into its operations, it becomes clear exactly why the public was shielded from the program and why it will never be taught in schools. The Phoenix program had interrogation centers set up by the CIA for the most ghastly of physical punishment. Punishments including sexual violence. In several instances, this violence was followed by murder. The Bell telephone hour was the name of a punishment that involved attaching live electrical wires to the most sensitive parts of the body, even the tongue. The water treatment involved submerging the captive into water to simulate the sensation of drowning. Arguably the most disturbing punishment found in the Phoenix program was called the airplay. In this punishment, a prisoner had their arms tied behind their back and was suspended in the air from a hook in the ceiling. From there, the prisoner would be beaten with rubber whips, rubber hoses, or even attacked by the facility's police dogs. Testimony from intelligence officers present at the facilities confirmed much of this horror. One such account detailed Vietnamese prisoners being kept in cages on their way to death by starvation. The same account spoke of wooden pegs being driven through a prisoner's ear. The Bell telephone hour was clearly detailed in the account. Sealed telephones were attached to prisoners' most private appendages to shock them into admission and submission. Lo and behold, the Phoenix program faced the most severe criticism. This criticism was multifold, not least for its methods, but no less for its targets. In design, the purpose of the Phoenix program was to break down the politics and ideology feeding and propelling the Viet Cong. As a result, however, many civilians were targeted and killed under its name. Once the program was made public knowledge, the criticisms only grew in ferocity, and soon the U.S. Congress was conducting hearings. The CIA faced enormous pressure to shut the program down as it was earmarked by many as a civilian assassination program. The irony, and why they don't teach it in schools, it was a successful program at achieving its aims of negating the political activity of the Viet Cong. Moreover, Plan F6 under the South Vietnam government was nothing short of a copycat operation, unmasking American atrocities. If there is one thing a school curriculum anywhere is unlikely to ever hold, it would be the nation's participation in war crimes. The Vietnam War would hold the most dire war crimes committed by U.S. forces in the entire 20th century. It would be forever known as the My Lai Massacre on the 16th of March 1968, under the Johnson administration, in the Son Tin district of South Vietnam. The most shocking event of the Vietnam War unfolded. An entirely civilian mass of 347 to over 500 Vietnamese people were murdered by United States Army soldiers. Tragically, this mass murder of a civilian population was far from discriminating. It included women, children, and infants, as well as men. What would later be revealed is the extent to which all humanity was lost by perpetrators, and none was seen in the innocent victims. Sexual violence preempted much of the murder. Quite understandably, when the massacre became public knowledge some 20 months later in November of 1969, it stirred a roaring outcry across the globe. The U.S. public's opposition to the Vietnam War escalated to new heights. not only from the horrific scale and details of the war crime, but the amount of time and effort put in to cover it up. So it goes without saying, you may think, that the Sunmi incident is not part of the U.S. school curriculum. Curiously, there is quite a remarkable instance of integrity and valor well worth teaching within this grim tale. Among the U.S. servicemen committing this abomination, there were 3 who stood apart. 3 U.S. Army soldiers present tried to stop the massacre and tried to rescue innocent civilians hiding for their lives. At the time, these 3 soldiers were ostracized and even labeled traitors by one officer holder. Some 30 years after the fact, they were rightfully decorated by the U.S. Army in full conciliation with its own worst sins. They were recognized and honored for protecting innocents from harm in a war zone. Surely a lesson worth passing on. The veiled toll of a Vietnam offense. One of the ugliest inevitabilities of war is the horror it brings to the civilian population of the land it unfolds on. Vietnam was no exception, and much of this reality would be shielded from the U.S. public at the time and in school curriculum to come. Enter Operation Speedy Express, an operation conducted by the U.S. Army 9th Infantry Division, lasting some 6 months in total. The U.S. military intended to disrupt the communication lines of the Viet Cong, destroy supply lines from Cambodia, and remove any access to established bases. However, taking war to the enemy in Mekong Delta had some profoundly grim outcomes. From the 1st of December 1968 to the 11th of May the year following, some 8,000 infantrymen took combat to the provinces of Quien Hoa and Vien Binh. Though it wasn't just troops on the ground in use for the operation, technology to detect ammonia and carbon traces were used to sniff out the enemy. The scale of the destruction of the operation can comfortably be put down to the staggering aerial bombardment on the Delta. Using 50 helicopters, 50 artillery pieces, and over 3,000 tactical airstrikes from U.S. Air Force fighter bombers, Mekong Delta was simply ravaged. What was soon made clear and unlikely to be ever seen in school textbooks was what this did to the civilian population of the provinces. Operation Speedy Express produced one of the highest ratios of civilian to combatant deaths of the entire conflict. When the operation was over and its results were tallied, it had produced a 50 to over 70% civilian casualty rate. More disturbingly, this result is likely to have come from the directives of those higher in command. It's since been revealed both infantry and commanders in the operation were told they could not leave until a desired number of kills had been met. When body count is a measure of success, then people running away, people in pajamas, and civilians at night become targets. When body count is a measure of success, the school textbooks are never to hear of it. Robert McNamara, the U.S. Defense Secretary across both Kennedy and Johnson administrations, would don the phrase he would come to be known by for many, the fog of war. Irrespective of feeling or perception of the Vietnam War, never has a phrase been more apt. From its length, perception, outcomes, and traumas, the first major ongoing conflict of the 20th century since World War II seemed only to raise more questions than provide any meaningful answers. The fog of war is a near-perfect synonym for the entire conflict itself, how so much atrocity took place, and why so much of it will never be taught in schools. One infamous vehicle of atrocity was the elite U.S. Army unit, Tiger Force. The elite's dark deeds in Vietnam's shadows. In 1967, across 7 months of combat, the Tiger Force unit was responsible for multiple war crimes. From May to November of that year, Tiger Force members would perpetrate heinous acts during the Operation Wheeler and Song Ve Valley military campaigns. Initially, Tiger Force's behaviors were something of an urban myth among those conscripted to tours in Vietnam. The accusations bounded around included mutilation, excessive physical punishments, and murder. Once the Army's Criminal Investigation Command caught wind of it, a 4-year investigation was launched. What was uncovered was more chilling than the worst of rumor had to offer. From 1971 to 1975, the investigation managed to bring to account those who served in the ill-intentioned unit. Tiger Force members gave sworn testimony to the investigation. The revelations were chilling. Perhaps most incredibly, some of this testimony came from the very people who committed such acts, all of which were cast-iron war crimes. The testimony stated unit members would collect the scalps from those they'd murdered, while others would make necklaces comprised of human ears. It outlined how intentionally killing unarmed Vietnamese innocents was routine, and planting weapons on the unarmed was far from uncommon. It would state that executing prisoners was a matter of routine for the unit, and that sexual violence was not uncommon either. This is History on Fleek, and we'll see you next time.